I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Upper Providence Board of Supervisors budget meeting, Monday, November 8th, 2021. If everyone would rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. And I assume everyone's had a chance to look at our short agenda. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
All right, I have a motion to approve the agenda in a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. All right, now is the time for public comment. And it doesn't look like we have too many public commenters here, but I'm going to start giving this little spiel at every meeting. I would like you to contain your remarks to 3 minutes if possible. You must come up to the microphone, speak directly into the microphone, state your name and address, and if you ask questions during your period, it's to the discretion of the board and the staff whether they answer those questions, so if you don't get an answer, then move on. All right, so if we have any public comment, please come forward. Seeing no one coming up to the mic, we'll move on to our business. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to review at a high level the budget for 2022 and decide. Our only decision tonight is whether the budget framework that we're presented tonight we can work within over a series of workshops and then adopt the budget in December. This board can vary as much as 10%, so about $2 million in our budget from what we agree to advertise tonight to the public and what we eventually adopt in December. So that's what we're looking for tonight, that this is a framework that we can work within, and any questions, and then hopefully as we get into the three following workshops, we'll get those answered. And our number one item on the agenda is a presentation of the final FPM report, which is our assessment of our finances and a 5-year plan. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Fien Lung.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Vian Long, and I'm a consultant with Public Financial Management, PFM. And I'm here tonight to provide a high-level overview of the report that we submitted to the township concerning the 5-year plan strategy. Just to kind of back up a little bit, the multi-year planning process that we use, not just for Upper Providence, but for all of the places that we work with across the state and the country, really consists of 3 steps. The first step is a financial condition assessment, which essentially helps us understand where the township has been historically, financially, and where it is going forward, absent any adjustments or corrective actions. This is largely a diagnostic exercise, but it is important because it gives us a sense of, essentially, if you take your hands off your steering wheel of a vehicle, where does it go? But numbers alone doesn't tell us the whole story. And that's why we needed the second step, which is a high-level operational review. Through that, we talked to the department directors in the summer this year, where we understood kind of how they do what they do, because not every place is the same, and we had to talk to the department heads to understand what especially is special about the way they operate and how they differ from the other places that we have worked with. So we spent the summer talking to different department heads to get a sense of the operational details and combining those 2 things, the operational piece, which is the second step, and the financial piece, which is the first step. That led us to the third piece here, which is the initiative development. Initiative is just our name for recommendations, essentially, and basically led us to develop the 5-year plan strategy, which ultimately consists of 20 recommendations, and that is what I'm presenting on today. So let me kind of step back a little bit and do a recap on the next slide here of the financial condition assessment, which, by the way, we presented to the board back in June of this year. Next slide. So if we kind of look back at the township's historical financial performance, which is really where the financial condition assessment starts, what we found is that the township's financial trajectory was good and strong from 3 different perspectives. From one is the amount of reserves, and that's a bar chart you see at the lower bottom here. This is the unassigned fund balance, and unassigned is just a fancy name that accountants use to say it's not restricted for anything. It's basically reserves that it can be used for anything. You can see that growing from $4 million in 2015 all the way to in 2020. These are preliminary numbers because the 2020 audit is not out yet, but it's basically over $14 million. And you see that growth over the span of 6 years. And that gives us a sense of how the township's been doing, and the fact that it's growing tells us that every year the township has been able to not just balance its budget, but generate surplus that it was able to put in the reserves, and that's a very good indicator of the strong financial performance. The second indicator, to me at least, is that the township has been able to make hard decisions to make sure that it is financially viable. So in the bullet points on this slide, it lists the kind of actions that the township has taken over the last couple of years, and that includes establishing a real estate tax levy, changing benefits for employees, and so on and forth. These are hard decisions, and I don't want to minimize it because I've worked in a lot of places, and it is very hard to make these decisions. And the fact that the township has done these things over the last couple of years is another perspective of why I say the township has strong historical financial performance. Those are my evaluation based on my numbers, based on talking to different township managers. But the third perspective I want to offer is external. This is by the credit rating agency. So when the township goes out and issue debt or bonds, it has to go through the credit agencies, S&P, Moody's, Fitch. Those agencies would evaluate how likely it is the township would pay the debt back in full and on time. And that's when they rate the township. And so when last year, in October, when the township went out and it got the rating from the credit agency, it got a AAA rating, which is the highest rating there is. So not only did my evaluation shows that the township has a strong financial performance, but the external rating agencies also cited that. So that was the financial condition assessment of the historical perspective of where the township has been. If we look prospectively moving forward, let's move to the next slide here. You might ask, okay, well, if we have been doing so great, why do we even need a financial plan right now? Why are you even talking to you? Why are you even talking to us today, right? And the reason for that is, despite all the strengths that the township has seen and has had, there are some risks going forward. And let me just kind of give you some examples here. For the earned income tax, for instance, the township has seen a big growth in the earned income tax base, and in 2017 and 18, we even saw double-digit percentage growth in the earned income tax. But however, in 2019, and know that this is before the pandemic, in 2019, the earned income tax already started slowing down. It didn't mean that it didn't grow. I meant the growth started slowing down. So instead of a double-digit growth, it went to a single-digit growth. So that was indicative of a risk here, where the township may not be going to be experiencing as much of a growth as it has historically, and that's one of the risks we identified. The other risk is the real estate tax, where it was a great decision financially for the township to establish a real estate tax, but that growth is actually not very high, as the assessed value has been only growing by 1% to 2% annually. And this is no fault of the township, by the way. This is just the way Pennsylvania assessment works, is generally your assessed value don't really grow unless the county as a whole has a reassessment. So those are some of the risks on the revenue side that we have identified. If you turn to the expenditure side, right, the township generated savings from kind of restructured health benefits and reducing the premium growth, but going forward, unless you keep on doing that, your health benefits cost is going to still be driven by healthcare inflation, which can range between 3% to 8%, really, depending on the places you're talking about here. Nationally speaking, the healthcare inflation is generally 5% to 7%, and you begin to see that discrepancy between expenditure growth, which is higher, than the revenue growth, which is generally lower. I mean, if you look at the real estate tax, the assessed value, like I said, was growing by 1% to 2%. So you're beginning to see that kind of discrepancy between the revenue growth and the expenditure growth, and that's why a multi-year financial plan is necessary. And I say that for any kind of place. It doesn't matter how affluent you are, doesn't matter where you are, a financial plan is still important because of all these risks that we have talked about here. So that was the financial condition assessment that we have done, and we presented to the board back in June earlier this year. And then we spent time talking to the departments over the summer, and then in the fall we started developing recommendations. So let me move on to the next slide here. Before I want to move in the recommendations, I just want to say this is kind of the last step of the financial condition assessment, which is to say, what if I take my hands off the steering wheel? What would my projection show? And note that this is based on the 2021 budget, which is why it shows a deficit in the 2022 projection. By law, you have to adopt a balanced budget, and so every year kind of go through this exercise of basically eliminating these deficits, either through revenue increases or expenditure reduction or both. What you see here is that absent any adjustments, absent any corrective actions, what we're projecting is annual deficits from year to year. You see that the deficit itself is not super big, like it's about $200,000 to $400,000, which is not very large for Upper Providence. I mean, your budget size is less than $20 million, so it's not super big here. But it is also important to know that this does not include all of the investment needs that the township needs. It only included what was included in the 2021 capital plan. So for instance, if the township wants a new library, that is not included in here. So if the expenditure increases because you build a new library, those red numbers are going to increase. So that's the premise of the baseline projection here, and that was our conclusion from the financial condition assessment. So let's move on to the plan strategy here. How do we eliminate these deficits, and how do we make sure that the township has enough room in the budget to make investments? So let me talk about the investment. When I said the numbers alone, the red numbers you just saw previously didn't include all the investment needs. If you look at this table here, to the left here are the investment needs that were included in the baseline projection included in the 2021 capital plan. So that includes stormwater improvements, that includes road paving, a bunch of other things. The right column over there are the things that were not included in the baseline projection, and that includes a bunch of improvements to the trails and parks. Didn't include a new library, and didn't include a bunch of things. It didn't include a public works building upgrade, which is in desperate need of upgrading. So those things were not included in the baseline projection, and once you include that, you would see the red numbers going from whatever it was, $0.2 to $0.4 million, to something much bigger. I will also add here that in addition to these necessary investments, which we identified from talking to the departments, we, PFM, also identified some additional investment that we felt the township needs. Example, the police study last year in 2022 identified a number of recommendations regarding use of force, and the police department also talked about the need to invest in non-lethal weapons. Those things were not included in the 2020 capital plan. Another thing that we identified was the finance department that we felt needed additional capacity. Right now, because of limited capacity, the finance department is very much focused on the financial transactions, right? Entering your journal entries, processing invoice, those things, whereas the finance department ideally should be thinking about kind of more strategic things as well, in addition to all the things that you're already doing. So all that is to say there is a bunch of investment needs that are needed, and our charge here is to not only make sure that the township is balanced budget-wise, that you're not only just surviving, but that you're able to build from a position of strength and be able to invest in the bunch of things that we talked about here to keep on achieving your goals and keep on achieving your mission, and that was our charge here. Let's go to the next slide. For that reason, right, because there is a lot of investment needs, and oftentimes in local governments, the question about should we invest in this or should we invest in that, oftentimes the question is not so much about whether an investment is valuable, but whether it's worth supporting than something else. And let me say that again. It's often not about whether an investment is valuable or not. It's always valuable to invest in something. It's just whether or not you should support it instead of something else. We make that decisions on a daily basis for our own finances, right? I have a limited paycheck. I can't buy everything I want. I would ideally like everything that I see on Amazon, but I can't afford it, right? So I make that decision on a daily basis, on a personal basis, and the township and all local governments make that decision on a daily basis in a broader sense too, right? Should I invest in public safety or should I invest in the library? Should I invest in public works, building upgrade, or should I invest in the vehicle upgrades? Like, which one is more important to me? These decisions and these conversations are difficult, and that's why the first recommendation in the plan is to use the mission as the guiding framework. And our first recommendation is the townships should draft and finalize a mission statement as soon as you can, so that you have an overarching statement to guide your spending allocation decisions. We took a shot at drafting it. I'm not saying this should be the township's, who am I to determine what the township's mission statement should be, but this is a draft that we have drafted, and it says to provide for the health, safety, and welfare of residents, businesses, and visitors in a responsible and cost-effective manner, and to provide for the responsible protection and development of the township resources and its resources. It sounds bland and generic, and you're like, it sounds like all the mission statements I've read, but it does highlight a couple of things. When you look at the pie chart to the bottom here, you see that more than half of the township spending is on public safety, and clearly that's a priority for the township, and that's why it's included in the mission statement, right? Public works and parks and recreation, those advance the health and safety and welfare of residents as well, and that's why it's included in the mission statement. And when I say, the township does it in a responsive and cost-effective manner, a couple of minutes ago I talked about the hard decisions that the township made. That's evidence of the cost and effective manner. That quote in there, that's an evidence of that. The hard decisions is so that the township can provide all of these services highlighted in all the colors in the pie chart, so that the township can do that in a cost-effective manner. All of that to say, mission statements are important. It should guide spending allocation decisions, and they should not be blunt and generic. In fact, everything in there should be meaningful and should serve a purpose. And so that's our first recommendation for the 5-year plan. Let's go to the next slide. After the mission statement, there are really 3 overarching strategies. First is to make sure you use the American Rescue Plan Act money, ARPA money, wisely. I'll talk a little bit about that. The second is workforce strategies. Workforce costs, personnel costs represent 2/3 of the township's general fund expenditures, so naturally it has to be part of the 5-year plan strategy. But you can't fix a financial deficit, you can't fix a budget hole just by looking at expenditures alone, so you have to look at revenues as well. I always say that for any place, you always have to use expenditure strategies and revenue strategies together in order to achieve any kind of financial stability, and hence we look at revenue opportunities along there. And I will say here that oftentimes when we talk about revenue opportunities, everyone's brain turns to taxes, right? But that's not the only thing. Actually, taxes is not something that I would highlight in this presentation because that's not the only revenue source, and that should not be the sole focus of any local government. So we look at charges for services, we look at fees as well. But those 3 are the 3 kind of overarching strategies, so let me kind of highlight each one of them in details. Upper Providence is getting $2.4 million from the federal government related to ARPA, and let me be clear here that this is a local allocation. This is not related to other allocations that Montgomery County gets that may filter through to you. This is actually money that you are getting. And when the federal government wrote the law regarding ARPA, they, rightfully so, had a lot of eligibility guidelines. You can only use the money for X, Y, and Z, and it's very strict. Well, one eligible use is to replace lost revenues. What does that mean? Federal government essentially says, because of the COVID pandemic, a lot of local governments suffered from a big revenue loss. So you can use this ARPA money, you can use your ARPA allocation to replace your lost revenues, because if you lost them, you can use it to offset it. And we focus on this spending category because it is the most flexible. So this is really the green part here, where you can really use your lost revenue spending category on provisions of local government services, namely police, public works, fire, all the things. You can use it for pay-go capital. The only thing you can't use it for is to dump it all in your pension funds, or dump it all in your fund balance, or use it to pay for debt service. That's the only things that you can't do. But basically, it has a lot of flexibility, and it's important for Upper Providence to know that, because if most of your $2.4 million allocation is flexible, then you have more flexibility in terms of, okay, can I use this to fund some of my investment needs? And I think the answer is largely yes. And when I say largely, and I don't know the precise answer today, because the federal government essentially says you have to do that calculation every single year between 2020 to 2024, and I don't know what your future revenues will exactly going to be. So you have to do that calculation every year. But again, based on my estimates today, based on the 5-year projection, you should be able to use most, if not all of that, $2.4 million allocation toward revenue replacements, which again is very flexible in terms of usage. So that's the first strategy. Let me move on to the second strategy, workforce. Again, personnel costs is 2/3 of local government spending, so we have to address that. When you think of personnel costs for local governments, it's really a basic formula of the number of people multiplied by how much each person costs. And each person costs is not just their salaries, but also their benefits, the health benefits and the pension benefits and so on and forth. So when you look at the workforce equation, you have to look at the number and the dollar. The township is already trying to control costs on a per-person basis very well. And what I mean is, again, that the township is looking to health benefits changes, look at a bunch of things to make sure that cost per employee is reasonable and sustainable in the future. And so where we try to add value in this 5-year plan is to look at the number. Right? What is the right staffing level for the township? And that's a really hard question to answer because the right staffing number really depends on the service level and the service quality that you really want. So that there's no one-size-fits-all answers, and sometimes benchmarking helps, but it doesn't really tell you much. Just because someone else spent this much on police doesn't mean that you should too. Because it's so hard, we use 2 guiding questions to help the township in that way. The first is a cost-benefit question, right? What is the cost of providing services at different levels, and how does that compare to the benefit of doing so? And it sounds very consultant-y, I realize that, but really, when you know what you're trying to get out of what you're paying for, you can make better decisions. Example. If the police department comes to you and say, I need 2 more police officers so that my response time is higher, that doesn't tell you a whole lot. But if the police chief comes to you and say, I need 2 more police officers because right now, my high priority calls, I'm responding at 5.8 minutes. I need to reduce it back down to 5 minutes, and I need 2 more officers to do that. Now you can make better decisions because you're quantifying what the benefit is and you're quantifying what the cost, and you can say, okay, am I willing to spend X dollars on reducing my response time from 6 minutes to 5 minutes, right? That's why the quantifying piece is important. The second question that we try to use to help the township determine what the right staffing level is a prioritization question. Right? Earlier in the mission statement slide, I showed the pie chart showing more than half of the township spending is on police and fire. Is that the right way to spend the township's total money? I mean, that is why the mission statement is important, because that helps you address that question is, should we be allocating resources differently? Should we be increasing our parks and recreation slice a little more based on our priorities? That's a question that I cannot answer, but it should be guiding the decision makers in the township to be able to start realizing what the right staffing level should be. So let me use 2 specific examples to talk about this point here. If we go to the next slide, I realize that the fire staffing is a big point in the 2022 budget. I want to spend some time talking about it. My understanding is the township wants to move toward a 24-hour daily operation, and that is a good goal in itself. The question here, again, using response time, is what is the cost of providing services at different levels, and how does that compare to the benefit to doing so? My recommendation is do not start at asking how many firefighters should we have. Rather, start at asking what is our current response time, and how does that compare to our desired service level and quality. Starting at the end result that you're trying to get at is going to help you kind of work backwards in terms of the staffing level that you need. It also gives you a kind of metric, right? Now you can measure against what you're performing. When you spend money on a service, taxpayers should be able to know what they're getting in return. And so having some kind of performance metric in terms of like, this is our response time, and this is the value you're getting from paying the taxes, that is important. And that helping to quantify that is going to help you make those staffing decisions as well. I will note also that our recommendation here is also that because it's such an important and big area, that you might want to have a consultant look at the fire operations as well, just simply because the last study was done in 2014, and that was prior to the township becoming a combination department and having career firefighters to staff. So that was one of my recommendations, is to find a consultant to be able to address some of these questions, frankly, more knowledgeably than I can, because I'm not a fire consultant here, and who is able to tell you what should your right staffing level really be, what should your right response time really be, and if there are different tactics that you can use in order to basically get more bang for your buck here. The second example I want to use here is for the library. So I understand that the township is contemplating whether or not it wants to build a new library for township residents. Right now, your township does not actually have a library in itself. You have to go to different Wordsford and Norristown in order to access a library. When you think about the cost benefit of a library, again, I'm trying to quantify the cost piece because the benefit piece is something that needs to be deliberated and discussed. But for the cost piece, that's where I can come in and help you. When you think of a library, there are 3 different cost components. There's the cost to construct a library, right? There's the cost to actually keep it running on a daily basis, someone to do programming, to do the books, to actually staff the library. But there's also the building and maintenance cost, right? Every time you build a new building, even though it's a new building and the cost upfront for maintenance is pretty low, over time, you're gonna have to pay for janitorial services, maintenance costs, and those costs really should be part of the decision here. So those are the 3 cost components related to the library. And if we go to the next slide here, based on a very, very rough estimate, we're estimating on an annual basis it's going to cost $2.3 million in the initial 9 years, and it's actually going to go up even more beyond the next 10 years, largely because of how the debt service is structured. The debt related to the construction of the library is going to go up from almost $800,000 to $1.6 million after 10 years. My recommendation when you deliberate on whether or not you want to build a library is not so much who is my provider, how big should the library be, what kind of amenities should we have in the library building, none of that. The first question that you have to answer is, are we as a township willing to pay a library tax in order to fund a new library? You should not be using your operating budget in order to pay for that library, because if you try to create room in your current budget to pay for the library, what naturally happens is that your other priorities get crushed. Your current parks and recreation priorities, your police and fire priorities, those things will get crushed. If you just try to do that in the long run, it does not help anyone, because at the end of the day, your goals won't be achieved when you start kind of moving and shifting your priorities. So again, the biggest question is, do we as a township want to levy a library tax, and are we willing to do that? Right now, we are estimating $1 million, and that number can change depending on, again, what the cost estimates would be. But ask yourself, are we willing to levy $1 million library tax in addition to the real estate tax that we already have? And if the answer is no, then that's the end of the conversation. You do not have to go into how big should the library building should be. And that's really the kind of cost-benefit question that we're trying to outline for the township. In these conversations, I just want to be human and acknowledge that these discussions are really hard, and you cannot have these discussions purely just during the budget process, right? I would imagine that these conversations will be ongoing beyond this month, beyond December. It's going to go into next year, and you might have to come back to it at some point as well, even if you make a preliminary decision. Let's go to the next slide here. I have talked about ARPA, the federal money. I've talked about workforce strategies. And the third strategy here is revenue opportunities, new funding sources. And as I said, when we talk about revenues, people's mind sometimes automatically goes to taxes, but that doesn't have to be the case. The first revenue recommendation we actually provided is to levy a stormwater fee. Right now, the township does take care of its stormwater system, but it does it through the general fund, and does it currently with the earned income tax and the real estate tax it gets. A stormwater fee is a really appropriate way to address those needs because it spreads the cost more equitably. So right now, real estate tax is levied on those who have taxable property. Nonprofits do not pay the real estate tax. With a stormwater fee, tax-exempt entities also have to pay the stormwater fee. So if there's a school building, they have a parking lot, they have a driveway, all of that would be subject to the stormwater fee, which is why it's more equitable. The other reason why it's more equitable is incentivize people to start taking care of their stormwater system. If you install a rain garden, you would get credit from the stormwater fee. It incentivizes people to start taking care of the system better, and in the long run, it really should reduce your long-term maintenance cost. And that's why the first revenue recommendation we provided is a stormwater fee, because it just spreads the cost more equitably amongst users. I'll add one more note is that whereas the real estate tax is based on the millage, right, based on the assessed value of your property, the stormwater fee is actually based on your impervious area. So the more impervious area that you have, the higher fee you would pay. So that's another way that it would increase the equity in terms of who is paying for the cost of maintaining the system itself. Taking this concept further, we recommend the township to assess the streetlight assessment once it has done a stormwater fee. And why is that? Right now, the township does not have LED lighting, and that is increasingly common, not just because LED lighting is more energy efficient, but because it has a longer useful life. And just like the stormwater fee, in order to spread the cost more equitably, you want to do a streetlight assessment because the users are now paying for it, not just everyone, regardless of who uses it, but that you're now spreading the cost more equitably amongst taxable and non-taxable payers. So our recommendation for the streetlight assessment is that before the township embarks on a LED replacement project, do a streetlight assessment so that you have the upfront funding and front funding mechanism to pay for that project on an ongoing basis, and gives you the opportunity, again, to spread that cost more equitably. So if we go to the next slide, we have talked about the mission statement as a guiding principle for the 5-year plan. We have talked about the 3 pillars of strategies: the ARPA funding, the workforce strategy, and the revenue opportunities. And the last thing I want to touch on is best practices here. When we talk about best practices, people think, well, these are just nice to have, these are just good things that people do. But all of the best practices that we included in the plan really have a financial and operational impact. And I want to use the false alarm ordinance as a way to explain that. So if we move to the next slide, one of the best practice recommendations that we provided is for the township to, at the very least, start enforcing its false alarm ordinance. Right now, about a quarter of the fire department's calls are related to false alarms, and over 90% of the police department's calls, burglar calls, are related to false burglar alarms. These trends are actually fairly common. If you look across the nation, a lot of places, a majority of the police calls are actually false alarms. Our recommendation is for the township to start actually enforcing its ordinance more closely, so that people who actually incur false alarms are appropriately fined. I would use myself as an example. I live in Philadelphia, and when I have an alarm system, and I actually pay a registration fee annually at $50 annually, I just have to pay that. That way, the government can track who has a false alarm, who has an alarm system, and is able to say, okay, X% of the township population has an alarm system, and now I know who the frequent flyers are who incur false alarm all the time. This is really important for Upper Providence Township, especially because your daytime population is higher. You have so many commuters who come into work here, and that's really important too. So for the false alarm recommendation, not only should you be adhering to the ordinance itself more closely, our recommendation is also to look into whether a registration system would be worth it. And I will say, plenty of Montgomery County townships use a false alarm registration system. Plenty of places have been, adhering to their ordinances and actually fining appropriately. Right now, the township, my understanding is the township doesn't actually fine residents until the 3rd false alarm incur. So that's one recommendation where, as you can see, a best practice of adhering to your own ordinance has a financial impact, right? It should reduce the time that your police officers and firefighters should spend on addressing false alarms. It should have a revenue impact because now you're actually getting your fine revenue that offsets some of the cost of that. And it also has an operational impact because now your police officers and firefighters are actually out doing the community policing work that they should be doing, and so addressing all these false alarms. So that's an important concept to understand, that best practices are not just because it's a good idea, but because you want the financial and the operational impact. In the plan itself, we have a couple more best practices, such as adopting a one-time windfall policy. If you have one-time revenues, use it appropriately. Do not use one-time revenues to pay for ongoing costs, right? You do not, that's a terrible example. If you get a lottery, you shouldn't use that to pay for your grocery. That's a terrible example, but you get what I mean. Do not use one-time revenues to pay for ongoing costs, because that's just not best practice. In reality, it should have a financial and operational impact. So the plan has a couple of those there, too. Bringing it all together, our evaluation is that if the township implements all the recommendations in the plan, the revenue recommendations, the expenditure recommendations, you really should have room to invest in some of the things that we talked about. You really should have room to do some public works building upgrade. You should be able to have room to invest in your finance department. You really should have room to do some of these things. But I will say, though, that even if you do everything, it's not going to create room enough for big-ticket items like building a library. And that's why, if we move to the next slide, one of the game-changing options that we also evaluated for the township is the sewer sale. And let me preface it by saying, the township, this is up to the township, and we do not have a preference in terms of whether the township should or should not sell the sewer system. Rather, we provide the information the township needs in order to make that deliberation. The concept is relatively simple, right? The township currently owns the sewer system. It levies a fee to offset the cost of maintenance and operations of that system. If you sell it, you lose control of the system and hence also the rates, but you also will no longer assess a sewer fee as well. We highlighted some of the pros and cons in this table here. I won't talk through everything, but I will say that if the township does sell the sewer system, immediately what happens is you would lose $400,000 in transfer into the general fund. Why is that? Well, you have a public works department. The public works employees maintain the buildings, they take care of the streets, they take care of the parks and the trails. They also spend some of the time taking care of the sewer system, and right now the sewer fund reimburses the general fund every year for the work that the public works employee does for the sewer system. If you sell the sewer system, you would lose that $400,000 in transfer immediately because obviously you won't have your public works folks working on the sewer system anymore. This kind of transfer is common. This is very common in terms of Pennsylvania local governments as they deliberate whether or not they should sell a sewer system. In fact, I was working with the city of Erie, which is on the western side of the state. They had the same question. We rely on X dollars in sewer transfer. How does a sewer sale affect us? That is one of the most immediate kind of financial impact. That's not to say you shouldn't do it, that's just one of the impact. And so we highlighted all the impact here in this table just to give the township the information it needs as it moves forward and as it thinks about what's the appropriate way to fund for some of the big ticket items. The one last thing I will say on this slide is you should not be using sewer proceeds to pay for any ongoing costs, right? An example, you shouldn't use the sewer sale money to pay for a bigger fire department. You shouldn't use the sale money to pay for the ongoing cost of operating a library. Again, matching one-time revenue with recurring costs is a bad idea, so don't do it. Let me summarize here and close, and I'm happy to take any questions here, is the plan culminates in 20 recommendations, and then it's impossible for the township to do all of the recommendations at the same time. So what we have done is we sequence them for the township based on our evaluation of the prioritization and say you should focus on these 5 things every year. And there are also other things in the column to the right there that should be for ongoing review, right? You should first of all, finalize your mission statement, but you should also review it ongoingly so that you can make adjustments as you need to. Again, I think the township is in a really good place right now, and in my executive summary, how I phrased it is, you are using this plan to build from a position of strength. It's much easier to make adjustments and change strategy when you're from a position of strength than when you're from a position of weakness, and I'm really glad that you're here. At the same time, there's still a lot of work to do, especially if you want to maintain the kind of service quality and level that you currently offer. And so this plan hopefully provides you with a roadmap to do that. And I'll say one last thing here is just because you hired us to do this 5-year plan doesn't mean that you're done, right? This process really should be repeated every single year. Right now you're doing the 2022 budget, so you're using this 5-year plan to guide your decisions there. But next year, 2023 comes, you're gonna face with the same kind of cost-benefit prioritization questions again, and you have to use the 5-year plan to guide your decisions that way. For that reason, our recommendation is for the township to keep on updating this plan on an ongoing basis. I'm not saying you should hire me every single year. That would not be my recommendation, by the way. But that you yourself should really update the 5-year projection every year so that you know, we took this action, what are the savings? How does that make us better? We took this action that increased revenues. How does it make us better? And those kind of incremental actions should help you not just close the gap that we showed earlier, but it should really help you advance your goals, and you really should help you make some of the investments that we talked about. That's all I have for my presentation. I'm happy to address any questions or talk about any of the points deeper.
Take a breath.
Thank you, Leanne. I have a question. you know, as we discussed earlier, our proposed budget for next year includes a mill increase. The red numbers going out through 2026, the mill increase that we would adopt in this budget, would that take care of those red numbers through 2026 at least? Just including what you included. I mean, I understand the library wasn't in and some other but just the capital investment that you had included in the budget, in the study.
Based on the information today, yes. But I will also caveat, which you already did, but I just want to do it myself too, is that things always change, right? Just because you offer 3%, this is a made-up number, just because you offer 3% wage increase doesn't mean that you won't do the same next year. And so based on information today, yes, but things can always change. I mean, one factor that, for instance, wasn't included in this evaluation was at the time when we did the financial assessment, inflation rate built into this projection was 2%. Right now it's 5%. I don't know how long this inflation level is going to be sustained. I'm not an economist, but those are the factors that would change over time. But maybe on the good news, maybe your revenue collection will be improved, and that may offset some of that reduction too. So again, based on information available today, yes.
Okay. Great, thank you.
I have a question. The streetlight assessment, can you tell me a little bit more detail about that?
Yeah, so this is actually provided in Pennsylvania law, and a lot of townships and boroughs in Pennsylvania actually does it. It's based on the, it's not based on the millage. Actually, there's a per front foot calculation, and similar to the stormwater fee, you would have to do a study at the beginning to make sure that, just like a stormwater fee, you know how you calculate the impervious area for each property. You would basically do the same thing, but for the street light for each property, and so that basically everyone would get an assessment, but for the street light, not for the property itself, to see how much you benefit from it. And the Pennsylvania law allows you to calculate it on a per front foot level. And the concept is also the same, the stormwater fee, in that it's basically assessed to all properties, not just the taxable properties as well.
I think that would be for 2023.
Yeah.
And that's my recommendation, right? Do one thing at a time. Do the stormwater fee first, because that's really the most urgent needs, especially given the floods. But then do that immediately after, again, so that you have the upfront money to pay for any improvements. I think, you know, if you had already done an LED project already, I think that can be sequenced later, but given that the LED replacement project is something that should be a priority, I believe, just because of the long-term savings it would generate, that would be why it's in 2023 instead of later on in the plan.
If I could, you did a tremendous job. You did this all without notes, which tells me... Well, you did it. You did. Yeah, well, you did it. No, you did a great job with it. This is, some folks would say that we paid you folks to do this, and we could have done it ourselves. I disagree. You did a great job, and this was a good plan on behalf of this board, because it's the most complete information I've seen in 6 years here. So it was a good decision, and thank you for the information. It's a good starting point for the town to move forward. So thanks.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any more questions for Lynn? All right, then I guess we can move on to our next agenda item, which is to review the proposed 2022 preliminary operating budget. So, Mr. Tieperman,
Yeah,
you're on.
it's a separate PowerPoint, so Brian's getting it. I don't know if I can do my ad-libbing as good as she did, so.
We won't hold you to that.
Good act, bad act, good act to follow. So. Tough act to follow. Brian, we need to go back. That's not the...
Mr. Peters has a question.
Yes.
What's the next step? We've gotten all these recommendations. I mean, is it now?
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Joe Peters, 9 Dana Drive. What's the next step now? I mean, she's made a great number of recommendations. And there's so many to be dealt with. I mean, so you just synthesize what she's presented and it just languishes? I mean...
No, Mr. Peters, this intends to be an active living document that when it'll be incorporated into this presentation, and Richard and I will be updating it. Next, hopefully may need to check in with you occasionally, but it's not
So
gonna-
we just got this relatively recently, so this board and further boards will look at things like in the back, we talked about the alarm ordinances. So that's low-hanging fruit that the town can implement in the coming months, whether it's the ordinance and other things that came up here. This is something that the town we should check off and work through. Not all recommendations. There's no way we're gonna. we would
Well,
approve
you
everything.
need to check them all off and say yes, no,
Yes.
yes, no. You know, maybe not, you know.
We got this on Friday,
Okay, I'm just, I
so,
mean, there are a lot of good recommendations here. I mean, we're going to see a budget for this coming year, and I'm sure that all these maybe none of these recommendations will be implemented in this coming year's budget. I'm just, you know, what's the process? I
Well,
mean, you guys just take them all under consideration one at a time and just move forward? Is that the process?
Well, actually, this did dovetail with the budget this year. That's why I asked her a question about, you know, does the millage increase that we're proposing in our budget cancel out those deficits? And that's just looking at a small set of what we're already doing with a few other investments that we've said we would make, like in parks and recs and some infrastructure upgrades, and doesn't include the big items like the library, and which is something that we're probably going to, that's firmly on the shelf at this point anyway, but,
Well,
yeah.
okay.
So,
guess
but yeah.
I'm just curious, who's got the lead here? Is it Mr. Tieferman? Is the board? I mean, is this
it's a
these are the
partnership.
ones, these are the things we want to attack or not attack, or?
That's what we will be discussing in the coming
right.
months, absolutely.
All right.
Yes, sir.
look, Joe, going back to the alarm ordinance, that's something that can be implemented, and if the board decides to implement it through the township manager, that can happen during the year, and it's not even considered in the budget, and it could start bringing revenue in. And it's not just revenue with the ordinance. The ordinance also helps the fire department respond so that they're not outside somebody's business at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to call somebody to get an answer rather than break in. So there's a big benefit to implementing that program. But that could be done at any time.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the other benefits is it makes business and homeowners care about the maintenance of their system and the fact that they're
That's just one
spitting the
example.
false alarms out, so, yeah.
There's so many opportunities,
Yes,
some good, not so good, you know, whatever. I just,
totally agree.
Yeah, it was,
how this all comes to fruition.
Well,
Yeah.
basically, we would just have to take them one by one and hash them out
Yeah.
by a committee.
Up to the board. Okay?
Well, and what you're not seeing, Joe, frankly, is they did a great job, and I know you paraphrased the report, but there are actions and owners inside of this. Well, you're not, no, there are. Responsible parties, Board of Supervisors, manager, pension fund, what, I don't know what I'm reading. Evaluate pension fund, investment options. So there are numerous items like that you're just not seeing. They're here.
And Joe, this becomes a public document after tonight. So I'll make sure you get a
Yeah.
copy.
yeah, it's definitely money well spent.
Well, I agree with that. This is a terrific, you know, money, very, very well spent. I'm just trying to understand the process by which all of what she's recommended, how,
Bill, I'll try to address some of these as I go through.
Yeah, exactly, to make sure it just doesn't sit on a shelf.
Yep.
And let me just add one comment. That's very common amongst all the clients that I've worked with, in the sense that they digest it, they take it, a portion, like sequence it like I did, a couple of recommendations every year, and a couple of years down the road, things change, and they update the plan, and maybe not everything got implemented just because of circumstances changed, and so that's very common. But you're right, the implementation plan, yeah.
All right.
Next slide. I'm going to just emphasize again, this is going to be a very high level overview, because at the end of this presentation, I'm going to be advertising 3 workshops where we'll be getting more into the weeds. So some of these things, I know there'll probably be some questions as we go through, but I wanted to really just give a high-level overview. This is the general fund revenue pie. As Bill said, we are looking at a adjustment in the mill levy in accordance to increased revenues for our fire staffing, our EMS provisions, debt service, capital infrastructure, and parks and open space are the areas that we're focusing on. Our major taxes that are going to remain unchanged is our real estate transfer tax. Our earned income tax is still our main driver in the town. I think we're starting to come out of COVID, and one thing I noticed in your we didn't discuss in the presentation that during the pandemic, some people who lived in the city worked here, so we got some of the city wage tax, and it still is unsure how many people in this new hybrid economy, how many people are going to be working from home, because depending on where you work from home depends on where you pay your earned income tax. So I'm still watching the EIT pretty carefully. So I'm pretty conservative in thinking that we'll get close to 11 million in 2022. Local services tax, our pilot payment, that's our payment in lieu of taxes. I think that's for the Expo Center. Licenses and permits are kind of building permit related. A lot of these are level for next year. Fines and forfeitures. Interest earnings, obviously you're going to see that number go down because we're in an interest rate environment where you can't get much on 0% or 0.2% interest. So, rents and royalties, that's for our wireless towers. Grants, shared in revenue, you're going to see that's going to be a big spike because that includes the revenues we've gotten in for the ARPA grant. Vienne said in her presentation we're going to be getting about 2.4 million. Richard, am I correct? We've already gotten 1.2. We're expected to get the next 1.2 next year. And one of our, as we go through, you'll see one of my recommendations is that we should use some of that ARPA money to seed the stormwater fund, because even if we put in a stormwater fee, we won't be able to collect the monies this year. Good song. Fees and permits, pretty much are staying level. Recreation program fees are pretty much remaining at level. I think we'll be getting out of the pandemic, so we're hopefully be getting back to more robust day camp programs, other recreational programs next year. Miscellaneous revenues, transfers in are just kind of pass-through monies, and that rounds out our revenue pie, including the real estate revenue adjustments and the ARPA money. We're looking at about 22 million in revenues for 2022. Do you want to go on to the general, next slide? Summary for the general fund. It's a balanced budget. You have to have a balanced budget, but it's our major cost centers in the general fund is our Board of Supervisors, administration and finance. That's administration and finance includes the finance department, the township manager's office, the human resources director, other administrative support services, the tax collector, legal services, pool building expenses, police protection. You'll see that the police department budget is actually going down a little bit, basically because I think we've had some good performance. Richard, am I correct, in the pension plan? I'll pause a little bit. One of the recommendations that Vienne had put in her plan is that we readjust the interest rate assumptions on our pension plan because I think they've been overly generous. That's how a lot of towns and public entities get in trouble with their pension plans, is that we overestimate the revenue returns, so we've lowered that a little bit. But even with that, we're still looking at a reduction in the police department budget for next year. Emergency services, that's our big, as you know, that's our big cost center that we're driving. We're going to have at one of our workshops a more robust discussion about the various staffing models. I mean, we had kind of a spirited discussion this morning on various approaches, but I think we've got some consensus on where we want to go for that. So we'll discuss that more at one of our workshops. Public Works, we're looking at around 3.4 million. Parks and Recreation is 1.5, and transfers out That's kind of our ins and outs of about 2.6. That's where we put a lot of our transfers to capital. Am I correct? I'm going to just go over the next slide, please. That's kind of the high level. I'm going to go by each cost center briefly. We're trying to update the org charts every year. As you know, we have a new police chief and a new lieutenant, and I think we've had some other turnovers there, and so that department is evolving. Next slide, please.
Just to be clear, new police chief, new police lieutenant who are longtime veterans
Longtime
here. It's not
veterans,
like we
yeah.
brought somebody in from the outside who doesn't know the township.
Good clarification. In the budget document, once it's available to the public, we'll go into more detail, but these are just some summaries. The police department budget is coming in about $6.6 million. The police department's very heavily reliant, very heavily focused on fixed costs. Salaries and benefits comprise the majority of that department, and with some we do have some capital expenditures and assessments, which I will go through. Next item. I don't know if Vianne got into a lot of discussions. I know in her larger report she talked about pay-go financing and capital financing. So as I go through every department, we went through each of the 5-year needs in the departments and have tried to determine which ones are best funded through 1-year financing services versus capital financing over a 3 to 15-year, depending on the life cycle of the capital project. So for the pay-go financing for the police next year, we're looking generally at police computers. When we have our workshop with the police, Chief Freeman will go into more detail on some of this forensic equipment and evidence management software. A lot of this stuff was recommended by our CPSM police report. And by the way, if you recall, the police report came out with like 95 recommendations. Lieutenant Freeman's going to kind of give us an update on where he stands at that workshop. So that's coming forward. Next item is
Quick question,
Yep.
Tim. Pay-go financing, does that just mean?
capital pay-go. Do you want to explain what pay-go is?
Yeah, pay-go generally means kind of cash financing, like basically taking money from your tax revenues on an ongoing basis. You use pay-go for vehicles, for instance. You get tax revenues from your payers, and then you pay it this year to pay for the vehicles. Versus financing, or debt financing is the other way to pay for capital expenditures, and is issuing debt. That's the other way to do it. And like I think I mentioned before, usually for bigger constructions, bigger building repairs, you usually want to use debt financing because the useful life of a roof is beyond 5 years, so you don't want to use cash today to pay for something that will last 20 years. For a library, however, that's just one example. If a big construction, then you want to use debt financing because the building is going to last for a long time. So I think best practices-wise, you want to use pay-go financing, cash financing, for things that last a very short time. Police cruisers may last a very short time, that you may want to use pay-go financing. But for bigger software, technology improvements, those are good kind of good pay-go financing options. But for anything bigger, even just building repairs, sometimes HVAC replacements, those are not necessarily big purchase dollars, but because it lasts longer, that sometimes we would see people using debt financing. I would just add that you could use a capital policy that really helps you define what should fall into which bucket. Sometimes I see in different municipalities policy where they say a useful life of more than 3 years and dollar amount of at least $10,000 should be debt financed, but everything else should be pay-go financed. So you see capital policies that way, structured that way, to provide some structure to which bucket capital investment should fall into.
And we had to do a capital policy when we went for our Moody's AAA. There were certain check marks, so we probably need to revisit that policy. Next item is the pay-go. Vianne just said that you can use police cars for pay-go. I'm actually not doing that. Next item. I'm actually proposing capital financing. Police cars, depending on whether you have a police vehicle, the average patrol car, they get a lot of miles. On average, they do close to 25,000. Our police department's been pretty good about maintaining all these police vehicles for about 5 years. So Chief Freeman and I are trying to get into a capital financing lease purchase schedule over the next, I really would rather not pay cash for police cars. I'd rather do like a minor capital finance, 3 to 5 year lease purchase for our police cars. Detective vehicles have a longer life than a patrol car. Motorcycles have a longer life than a detective's car. So I mean, all those have varying life cycles. So next slide. I'm going to move on to emergency services, also known as fire department, fire and emergency services. This org chart hasn't changed that much. It'll be on the in the budget document. Again, this is the biggest, as with the past couple of years, this is the department that's been experiencing the fastest growth. We're looking at increasing salaries and benefits. I think, again, when we get into our workshop discussions, there's some discussions on whether we do 4 new firefighters or 5 new firefighters to round out a 24, either a 16-hour or 24 schedule. I think that's worth a robust discussion when we have that. But generally, that budget is based on at least 4 new firefighters for next year and the accompanying group benefits. If you look at the bottom line there, it's close. We've just hit the $4 million mark on the fire department. That's pretty, it's a very robust number. The big lion's share of that is $893,000 is the debt service for the new facility. That'll be going online in April. We do have a breakdown of the PAYGO financing and the capital financing. Brian, if you want to go to the next slide. The PAYGO financing, we have new equipment for 4 new firefighters is around $60,000. We have, that should not be forensic equipment. That should be a rescue boat. That's a, I'm sorry, that will be updated. Sorry about that, Chief. That should be, that 25,000 should be a rescue boat. That's a merge error. So, but next item. The capital financing, as you know, I'm finding out fire departments are not inexpensive departments, and not only, especially when it comes to apparatus. We're looking at possibly replacing the aerial apparatus down at Blackrock. I guess that was, Chief, help me, 2012 aerial apparatus, if they're well maintained, I understand, can get a good, you can probably get them for 20 years. I would never recommend that we bond an aerial for 20 years. Maybe I would prefer that we go out no more than 10 years. So starting in 2024, I have a, things may change by 2024. Chief and I have had discussions on whether we want to replace the aerial, or there's 2 other pieces of equipment that we may want to look at it. None of them are cheap, but so I don't want to buy it. We need to really try to be diligent in how we spread out some of these fire department vehicles. We have lower level staff vehicles similar to the patrol vehicles that we're starting to program replacements out in starting in 2023. If you look at the bottom totals in the capital financing, especially when you include the debt service for the fire facility, you're looking at a pretty level debt service through 2026 of between about $1 million, I would think, and we're trying to keep it level, trying to keep the debt level. Next item. Moving on to the township administration, just so you know, this includes the Board of Supervisors as the legislative body. It includes the Township Manager's Office. It includes the Human Resources Office. One of the recommendations in the PFM report is that we increase the capacity in the Finance Department, which we've already done. We've onboarded a new HR director who's helping us get transferred into a new payroll system, which will hopefully give the Finance Department some breathing room to work on those strategic priorities that Vian talked about. We're looking at, one thing you'll see in the budget spread out through all these cost centers is a communications officer. We are including in there a full-time communications officer to be job costed proportionally across all the departments and assigned to certain special projects. especially, one area would be the MS4 stormwater education project. So even though it's not housed in the position will be reporting to me, but it will be costed out to various other departments.
Don't we have a part-time one?
Also, IT, our IT or systems administrator will also be, reports to me, but it's job costed across departments, yes.
I'm sorry, don't we have a part-time communications person, or they're not with us any longer?
Not with us.
Okay, good. So I'd have to be walked into that one, to the full-time thing. We'll talk about that in a week or so, but, all right.
Permit clerks, so I think that covers the administration department. This pretty much is your department, the Board of Supervisors. The board members get the salaries and the benefits, the dues and subscriptions, training. The only addition that I had in the discretionary donations is, we're in the process of forming a nonprofit group, so we're looking at having some seed money put into that item. I don't see any capital or capital assessment costs for the board. Some of the minor computer stuff we take out of the operating budget. Next item. This is the township manager's office. Township operations includes finance, HR, systems administration. That's going up a little bit on the bottom line because of our onboarding of our HR person. That's the big delta in that one. We got a couple of PAYGO financing projects, if we can move on to that, and I'll explain that one. 3 big projects that I'm proposing for our PAYGO are looking at a web redesign and rebranding, of trying to update our website and maybe do some rebranding of our township website. Meeting videography and a codification project. Meeting videography, I might want to expedite this fiscal year, and I'll be getting you guys some proposals on that. So.
That's that software, right, Tim, you were talking about? Yeah.
What's codification project?
Codification is codifying all of your, updating all of your legal codes, policies into a codified document. It's putting all your, so everything's accessible. Cheryl, if Cheryl were here, she'd explain that in her paralegal sense a little bit better.
It's going from paper to
yes, yeah, and we're trying to downsize. We're trying to maybe have 1 or 2 master copies of our code book, and trying to have it available on our website. So, next item. Tax collection really is a pretty maintenance budget, no changes there. I would say that if and I guess this is kind of an afterthought, is Julie Mullins' commissions are based on our current mill rate, so if we do change our mill rate, I think we need to have some discussions on whether we keep that the same or if we adjust that. That was something I haven't given much thought in, but that's really at the board's purview. Next item. Legal services. This is something that you could have a year, but you have no lawsuits. It's really a best guess based on past practice on what our legal costs are. I will tell you that next year is our last year of our police contract. It expires at the end of 2022. Whether we end up doing any more, the level of involvement we'll be getting in negotiating that might drive up our labor costs. I don't know. Our Joe Bresnan has graciously, we no longer do hourly billing with him. He gives us, he's on a monthly retainer with the exception of litigation and other developer-related projects. Next item. Moving on to planning and zoning. This is pretty much a maintenance budget. Next item. His budget's pretty much going down a little bit. If you recall, his main cost drivers in the past few years has been getting the complete streets plan done, the active transportation plan and the comprehensive plan, a lot of that legwork is done. So a lot of the costs associated with those projects are going away. So that's where you see the bottom line going down a little bit on that. Public Works, next item, please. I'm going to go over a little bit. Public Works is a little bit more involved because they have different funding sources. Their general operations consists of the director, the assistant director, our foreman, and our regular laborers. Round out the salaries and group benefits. Pretty much everything else stays normal. Where you get spikes in the Public Works budget, it depends on how much we allocate toward capital projects, and what we've tried to do with the whole PAYGO and the capital financing, trying to identify which projects we would want to borrow or do debt service over a long period of time, or do cash financing. So I have a couple of charts. I'll go over on that. Before I do that, there's another all-purpose account in the Public Works Department which is building operations. 2 years ago, we prorated all the building operation costs to each department, and we decided a couple of years ago it's better to have that housed in one cost center, building operations. So we now keep track of vehicle fuel, supplies, utilities, all of our insurance, anything dealing with our buildings and our facilities. As far as utilities, not debt service, but utilities goes into that building operations account. Now let's get on to the capital. We're going to be talking a little bit about the Public Works general budget, general capital budget, and then there's a sewer budget, and then I'm going to talk a little bit briefly. Vianne mentioned about the stormwater budget and the stormwater fee, which I'll address, which is assumed in this budget. For the general PAYGO financing, Tom's not here, so please don't ask me what some of these things are, like an electric scissor lift. I think I know what it is, but when we have our workshop with Tom, he'll go over a little bit more detail on these. But Public Works has done a pretty good job of getting a long life out of equipment that's, is what, 2008, 2009. Some of these items have been fully depreciated. So when they show up as a replacement, they're pretty much kaput.
Quick question to the streetlight improvements, is that switching them over to LED?
Yeah, that's a discussion we'll have to have. And when we have our workshop with Tom, he can go into a little bit more detail about the DVR-PC. That's trying to convert all of our streetlights into LED. We'll have to delve in. The budget doesn't assume anything about a streetlight assessment. That might be something we'll want to study in 2022 or to go into 2023. Vianne's right that if you do a streetlight assessment, you have to, it's kind of like what we're doing with the stormwater fee, you have to do a study. And they think that involves, Brian, correct me, engaging a lighting consultant to help us do that. So I didn't know if you were recommending that we hold off on that until we do the streetlight assessment study. Was that your recommendation? Okay. Okay.
Don't we already have a scissor lift over there at the rec center?
What's that?
Don't we already have a scissor lift over there at the rec
What is
center?
a scissor lift?
Renting it? Oh, okay. I thought we had one over there.
I thought you were going to tell me what it is.
Pardon me? I may need to borrow it.
I didn't mean to say per Brian, but I have commercial dehumidifier at per Brian. What was that? Do you know what that was about? So I'll take that out when we do the final.
We have several residential grade dehumidifiers that run constantly in the basement to keep the humidity down. When we get a lot of rain like we have lately, sometimes the carpet is wet for an extended period of time, and it's not good health-wise to have employees in this building routinely when that stays damp and potentially mold issues. So we're looking to have some commercial dehumidifiers on hand to dry it up and remedy that situation. We've done everything we can around the perimeter of the building to direct the water away. We think it's groundwater coming from underneath.
There's a couple more items on this pay-go for Public Works. Next slide. Just general computer upgrades. I think that rounds out. If you look at the bottom total, 2022, we're spending about $315,000 in pay-go expenses. I expect 23 to 26, I'm missing the 6 on the 20. We'll massage that as we get through the 5-year program. Next item. This is going into the capital financing portions of Public Works. Vienne mentioned in her report, and Tom will talk about this, we're looking at some upgrades to our Public Works facility. Number one, and it's about a $2.5 to $3 million project that we've been delaying probably the past couple of years. We're proposing, you're going to see $100,000 budgeted in 2022. We're looking at paying for that through 3 funding sources, through the capital financing. A lot of the stuff that we have to do at Public Works is directly related to MS4. Part of the EPA guidelines is that they're requiring all equipment to be fully covered, so a lot of our equipment is not. And we have a fuel gauge system that is on its last leg. Is that correct? It's over 20 years.
I think it's been down 2 times this year. It's obviously critical that we be able to fuel fire trucks and police cars and snow plows in the wintertime. Tim and I have discussed exploring options such as getting, Wawa cards that would be tax exempt, that we could buy tax exempt fuel. And we've kind of centered that conversation and this budgetary request around the fact that if power's out for an extended period of time, Wawa's not pumping gas, we do need to be able to deliver critical services, and we think it's in the township's best interest to maintain that supply here.
Walnut Street, so what we're looking at is for our next big capital finance for next year would be Public Works related, mainly to the building, the fuel station replacement, and then the big road project would be the Walnut Street reconstruction. I think Bill Dingman's done the design on that, and that should be ready for bid netting.
Burn it down.
Next year.
The 120,000 is just for what, engineering or something?
No,
Or?
120,000. This is capital financing, so it will be capital financed over 10 years. So we're looking at 120,000.
Okay.
So can I get more details on that one, Walnut Street?
We can at the workshop.
Okay.
It's been something that's been on the docket for a while. John, that's your neighborhood. Do you know much? I know it's in Walnut Street is in pretty bad shape.
My other question at the workshop is going to be, if we build a building to cover our Public Works equipment because of MS4 mandates, do we get to count that against our MS4 spend?
I think so.
Okay. That's important to know because, like I said, I want to make sure we're counting everything in that. It can be counted. So.
That's, go on to the next page. I think that covers it for, so we're looking at about, when you factor in all those projects, you factor in out for a 10-year capital financing, you're looking at $317,000. And if you look at the bottom line, and I've tried to work with Vienna on this, we've been trying to keep our debt service and our capital finance pretty level debt. I mean, it does go up a little bit out when you get into 24, 25, but we've been trying to keep it as level as we can. Again, at the workshop, we'll get in more details on this. Next item. I think we're moving on into sewer. This will be our sewer pay-go. We're at least blessed in the sewer account with a little bit more cash reserves, so we don't necessarily have to bond a lot of this, but you have some of the projects in 2022 is the Yerkes Road Sewer, our regular annual GIS upgrades, pump station upgrades, our Schuylkill Interceptor rehab, that's an ongoing project in our capital account. Greenwood Avenue to College Avenue. Our big project that we just got out to bid is Tindy Run. As you know, those bids came in around $1.5 million to $2 million under projected bids. So that gives us a little bit of capacity in that to take on new projects if we have to. We got the Mingo Station upgrade, and move on to the next one. I think that's it. For capital financing, 1/3 of what we're looking at doing for the Public Works building, so you'll see $100,000 in there for the Public Works building also, for that section, that part of the building project. And then we have some other equipment that we can capital finance. You can go on to the next one. This is moving on to stormwater. This is a new account. We are proposing, and Vian put this in her report, we are looking into implementing a stormwater management fee. We're not going to have the fee proceeds the first year. We may have some of it by depending on the time we implement it. But I'm proposing that we use some of the COVID or the ARPA monies to kind of seed that account, so we can start doing some of the projects. Some of the road paving projects we can do, we can use a portion of our stormwater monies for road paving projects. Every year we're coming up with new failed corrugated pipes in our older neighborhoods that need to get upgraded. This is something that's worthy of a workshop discussion. I did put in there an annual allocation from the Stormwater Fund of the land bank contribution. I know we're in the middle of doing a lot of FEMA buyouts right now, but this is meant to be more as a long-term land bank. As we get into floodwater mitigation and projects, instead of spending $1 million or $2 million on a stormwater project versus purchasing 2 or 3 homes, those are little projects, those are little types of things that we need to make. And it sets up a savings account that we can use to maybe down the road. It's next 5 or 10 years is.
I'm a no on that.
What's that?
I'm a no on that. We talked about this before. I'm just throwing it out there for when we have our budget.
We can talk about
Just
it.
I'm not into that. Sorry.
Yeah, and, go ahead.
You have to sell me
MS4
on that one.
MS4 permit compliance. One of the workshops I told Bill I would like to have is with our municipal authority, because we'll be getting into a lot of MS4 projects. If you go into the capital financing, one project that we're looking at is a project at Laurel Lane, and we see some other undesignated stormwater projects over the next few years. So we're just trying to get it into the hopper for that.
If I could opine on that, see, I'd rather spend money on that because we have neighborhoods that are flooding out. And so instead of spending money on buying homes and becoming owners of a property, we have neighborhoods that have stormwater issues,
Now,
just like that last
The
slide.
purpose of the land bank is you purchase the homes and you take.
Yeah, but we have neighborhoods that, just for our budget, we have neighborhoods that have flooding problems when it rains heavily. I would rather spend money on that than purchase a home outright that's right next to the river.
Yeah.
But that's a discussion that the board can have over a period of time. But
And I just want to be clear, because this is right on the red hot hopper right now, that the current buyouts that we are doing are all being funded by FEMA and PEMA.
Exactly.
We're not spending any township money
Yeah,
on
I don't-
any of
I don't
that
want there to
right
be
at
any
this moment, so.
Right.
I don't want there to be any confusion on the FEMA buyout. This is more of a long-term.
I agree, that's separate.
program.
I guess, and we could talk about it in the workshop, I wonder how you would determine which ones you buy, and it gets complicated, but we
It
could,
does get complicated. That's why we're not talking about it tonight.
But that's why I wanted you to know where I'm thinking, so that everybody
Gotcha.
knows that it'll be a topic.
Moving on to Parks and Rec. Next slide, please. This is the operations. You'll find that one of the big, if you look at the very bottom, one portion of the mill levy adjustment that we're looking at is a transfer to the Park and Open Space Fund. One thing that Vian and I looked at as we're looking at our 5-year plan is that we're getting more and more built out, 91, 92%. So the monies that we've gotten into the Open Space Fund from developer contributions is going to be going dry. I think we have our last big development. It's the apartments, and we may have some other ones that are in the hopper. But after that, you're looking at some very small, a few properties here, and we need to start, if we're going to really get our playgrounds upgraded, we need to boost the funding in this account. Next item. some pay-go financing in the Parks and Rec. And it just occurred to me, and we have here the drainage work at McFarland Park, which needs to get done. That probably should be funded out of the Stormwater Fund, not the Parks Fund. So I may be looking at pushing that out. But some of these other items are cash things, the pavilion upgrades, the Joyce property continues to incur costs. Sue, at our workshop, will talk a little bit more about the sheds and signs. Next item, next page. Park signage, and the one big one is the deck hockey repairs that we're starting to do already right now, but I wanted to show this in 2022. And the HVAC control system, Brian, I guess is with the rec center. Am I correct?
I'm not familiar.
We'll have to ask Sue on that.
Just a quick question about going back to the Joyce property, carriage house roof. What is the carriage house?
The carriage house is a two-unit apartment behind the Joyce property. When you drive back the driveway, at the terminus of the driveway, it's on the right side. So garage is on the first floor and two apartments on the second floor.
And Mr. Joyce leases those apartments out, right?
He does.
Okay. All right.
There's nothing historical about that. The building that we know.
I see where you're going, yeah.
If the building went away, there's.
There's no
I
loss.
was unaware of that.
Okay.
I was unaware of, he's collecting rents on the property that we own.
We'll talk about it in the workshop.
Okay, yeah, that's something that, yeah, that's something that I'd like to talk about in the next workshop. Also, I wanted to bring up the fact that, and I know that all of you know that I mentioned this before, if we're going to continue to pump money into this thing, and I don't care how little bit of money it is, I think we need to have a game plan for this particular piece of property. I don't care what it is, but, I'm against spending money on this property unless we have any more money on this property, unless we have some kind of game plan and know what we're going to do with it going forward. If you have a plan for it going down the road, I'm fine with that, but I need to know that the money's being well spent towards something positive.
A previous board made a contract. We have to work within it, but I'm with you in spirit.
Well, the previous board doesn't have to put these things in a budget, and I don't want to spend any more money on it. Another question that I have is, I noticed salaries here. We've not discussed what kind of an increase, a raise, I guess, that we're giving to everybody, or how we're doing that, or whatever.
Well, here's the thing.
If that's included in that salary,
We have, usually we put salaries in contingency, but this year we went ahead and put 3.5? 3.75 in there, mainly because we don't know what inflation is. Inflation right now is running around 5.
did you say 2.75?
3.75.
3.75?
7.5.
Okay.
In the current labor environment too, that's reasonable to have. I mean, whether we spend it or not, but yeah, I think that's a reasonable.
I don't know.
That's a good question. That's an important.
Okay, so here, are we handling that all like across the board? That means that everybody, even the lazy guy out there, he gets his 3.75% raise? Or do we give it are we giving the money to the department heads and telling them, you give whoever deserves this?
We have in
Whatever.
the budget 375 as a COLA, and then there's some monies for merit pool that we use for performance evaluations. And I can go into more detail at that. So, am I right, Richard? Help me here. That's right. Okay.
The police is contractual. Brian, can we, for the Joyce property, to John's point, do we have that contract, whatever that's written, so we can see that?
Yeah, I can circulate that to everybody tonight.
Yeah, please, thank you.
But you're talking about
The agreement with the Joyce and understanding the rent and some of the minutia in that Joyce property carriage house.
Yeah, because we just
Like
put
what-
like $200,000
what is
into
it?
that.
I mean, I don't think he's collecting rent, and then we're gonna replace the roof? Right, no.
Yeah, the home itself is the historical property there. Yes, that's why I want to understand exactly what the carriage house was,
Yeah,
okay.
we see that.
John, I should point out another important piece in the budget pie is health insurance. And am I correct, or is health insurance is 0%? Or health insurance increase is 0% this year.
Oh, really?
Next item. This is our capital financing. If you recall, we passed the park master plan, so we're starting to, we just don't want a document that's just gathering dust. We're going to start trying to implement some of this. So our focus, our major focus next year is the Blackrock Playground. As you know, we've already had to take it down. In the report, a lot of our playground equipment is not ADA accessible. So to me, that's the, of all the projects in the capital financing, it's the playground that needs to get done. Tom and I are looking at, Tom's gotten an estimate, and Bill can elaborate on this when we have our workshop. Coupled with the playground is we'd like to expand the parking area outside next to the skate park. The parking is very dicey there even on a good day. The good news is our skate park gets a lot of use, but we're convinced that when we put that playground out in that general location, we're not going to have enough parking. So we're looking at expanding making this part of it. So that'll be probably the big project for us next year as far as this. And hopefully we'll have it in place for next year's Community Day. Next item.
Pushed it back 2 years. I'm gonna have to go have a conversation.
I think that's it for the park. Moving a little bit now, just quickly, pivoting from general fund to sewer revenue. This pretty much is a maintenance budget. We adjusted rates a little while ago. I think some of the spike in 2021 in the forecast is from the sewer tapping fees from our projects that we did Tindy Run, so those aren't recurring costs. So we're looking at adjusted revenues of about 3.8 in our sewer fund. Next item is our expenses in our sewer fund. If you recall, VN said that we need to have a more official sewer transfer fee, is that correct, VN? Which this doesn't do, so we'll probably try to have a better breakdown on how we come up with those salaries. What we try to do is prorate how much time public works officials work in the sewer area. I know we have at least 2 or 3 dedicated employees, and so we try to prorate the benefits into that, so.
Excuse me, can you go back to the last slide? The unused EDU charges, that's $450,000. This is for EDUs that developers have purchased and that are not being used? Is that correct?
I believe so.
They're not connected, they have to be connected within 2 years. After they're not connected for 2 years, the sewer authority charges the township, so the township charges the first.
Okay, so for that 2-year period, are you saying that this authority, sewer authority doesn't charge the township for 2 years? Is that what you said?
That's right.
Okay,
It's
but,
connected, then it becomes part of the connection charge.
okay, but we continue to charge the developer for this, for that 2-year period?
Only after the 2 years.
Oh, okay, so we only charge the developer only after 2 years? Okay, so we're not making money off of this 450. I got it. Thanks, sorry, Tim.
That's all right. Can you go back to that slide, Brian? And so generally our expenses, this is also pretty much of a maintenance budget. With the sewer adjustment that we did a while back has allowed us to transfer more money into our capital fund that pays for the projects like Tindy Run. And so that's, we're starting to stabilize that fund with that increase. And I think that's served us well.
And have we already got notification from the Lower Perk Valley Regional Sewer that we're not expecting it?
No rate increase.
No rate
Am I
increase.
right, John? No rate increase from the authority?
No, right now, there is no rate increase, right?
Great.
Next slide, please. And this is kind of concludes my presentation. I just want to give you an idea of this is how our proposed mill levy is working out as we're looking at a fire levy of about 1.34 an EMS of 0.16, capital debt service infrastructure, 0.46, parks and open space, 0.23. So we're looking at a 0.19. We can round it up, Helene, to 2.20.
Is the EMS fee the same as last year?
I boosted it up a little bit, and
Okay.
there's some adjustment we can make,
Okay,
because
very
I
good.
put in the
Yeah.
money, I put in a contract amount,
Very good.
which we talked about, that can be adjusted.
Okay, good, thanks. Yeah, perfect.
And the next slide, I just wanted to share with everybody, I know there's some concern, I passed you out where we stand as far as our mill levy. I gave you a big sheet, but I thought it'd be nice to see where we stand locally. And if you look at our neighboring towns of Collegeville, Royersford, Trapp, Lower Providence and Upper Providence, we're at the very bottom, as we have the lowest of the rates when you factor in the county tax and the Spring-Ford school tax. We're at about 29.94. If we adjust the mill levy by what we're wanting to do about a mill, that still brings us, we're still at least close to 2.5 mills below our next lowest town, which is Lower Providence. So I think this is a responsible budget.
Yeah, and one of the things you didn't include on here too is the sewer fee that we pay in this township, which is about half of what it is in the surrounding
And
townships.
at one of our workshops, I'll have a chart, I'll chart that.
Good chart, Tim.
What's that?
That's a nice chart.
I'm telling you.
That's a good, well, no, your pending. All your charts are good.
One last thing, just go on, Brian, to the next slide. If everybody's okay with what you've heard, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask that you consider authorizing legal advertisement of the budget to activate the required 20-day public review period. Once you do that, I will post this publicly for public review effective tomorrow for public review, and then state law requires us, it has to be on public review for 20 days. We're going to have more than 20 days, and if you, I guess I'll stop there to see if there's any questions, if you.
Does anybody have any questions? What is under consideration was this framework of a budget close enough to the mark that we can go ahead and advertise it. We can vary from this about 10%, so about $2 million one way or the other, before we would have to re-advertise, and that gets us closed up before Christmas. So that's what I would like to do.
That's the goal.
Yes. So if there's any more questions or discussion, if not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to advertise the 2022 budget.
I'll second that.
All right, I have a motion to advertise the 2022 budget framework that we just reviewed. There's a required 20-day public review period. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion carries. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this last slide is just to let everybody know what our scheduled budget workshop. Cheryl has already advertised. We advertised this months ago, but Wednesday, November 17th, I'm proposing that we do these in an informal setting in the caucus room, and I'll have a Zoom feed for any public, and we'll have this caucus room open, Mr. Peters, if you want to join us. So, okay.
Well, these are public,
That's up to you, it's up to you guys.
it's kind of cramped in there. I think
You
I
wanna do
prefer
it
to
in
put, do what we did the last time, put a table in.
Okay, we didn't advertise caucus room, we just advertised the date, so if you want to, we can
Okay.
have it in here.
Yeah, we'll see how they're attended.
Do you want it videotaped? We can have the AVT here to videotape all of our, how formal do you want it?
It's a discussion meeting.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it doesn't need to be that far.
Keep it in here.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
discussion meeting. We're going to formalize everything we do in a meeting. It's public, but we're going to formalize.
We'll keep all
it
these in the meeting room, so all these, November 17th, we may not need the December 8th meeting, but I plan it just in case we
Okay.
need it. And I have reached out to the municipal authority to see what dates of those, because I think we do need to have a joint meeting with them on the whole stormwater issue.
And we will have department heads and chiefs here the nights that we discuss their budgets, so we can talk about scissor lifts and kicks and whatever else.
And I
Okay,
didn't put the date, the date on the final budget meeting is December 13th.
all right. All right. Yes, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
We're adjourned.
Okay, well done.